what you're talking about is the destruction of British society,
yes.
really?
Yeah. Civil society, yes. Voting is not a sacrament, it's not even a civic duty, and it's certainly not an emotional spasm. It's a practical act with a measurable effect. Work out what it is you don't want, most of all, and vote against it. And I said, the thing you really don't want, most of all, is the second half of the Blair revolution. I think that he's a man of the pretty strong, hard left, probably well to the left of Jeremy Corbyn.
And why have the right-wing newspapers and media not exposed this?
Because they don't understand it. But if you are an ex-Trotskyist, you do know, because you can read the signs and you understand the code. It's all there.
Peter Hitchens, welcome back to TRIGGERnometry. Now, Peter, I have to say, you have outdone yourself, because when I think about you, I think of you as a contrarian. You've got to the point where you're so contrarian, you're actually disagreeing with yourself, because you're famous for telling people, A, to not vote Conservative, and B, to leave the country if they still can. Mm-hmm. And here you are in this country telling people to vote for the Conservatives.
No, I'm not telling anybody to vote for the Conservatives. I'm telling them to vote against Labour. And it's, no, it's a completely different thing. People have to learn to vote against. I mean, for me, what I strove against for 20 long years was the determination of conservative, patriotic people in this country to continue to vote for a party that hated them. Now I have to strive against the determination of conservative, patriotic people in this country to vote for a party which hates them even more, and not to be able to see the difference between bad and worse. My position remains the same. I loathe the Conservative Party, and I always offer to do this. If you'd care to join me in a chorus of "If you hate the Tory Party, clap your hands," a song I learned in Glasgow in 1972, I'm happy to join you. I still hate the Tory Party. I still think the wisest course for anyone who could start a new life in a new country is to leave this country, but there are many who cannot leave, and therefore I have to act where I can to try and avert catastrophe. A Labour government in this country would make the past 14 years of Tory government seem quite civilised and intelligent, and therefore it has to be avoided at all costs. Yet I'm surrounded by people who, either by actually voting Labour or voting for Reform UK, are determined to install a Labour government, and I have to argue against it. I will not wake up on July the 5th thinking that there was anything I could not have done, anything I could have done that I didn't do to prevent that from happening, because it would be so catastrophic.
So
everything I've said remains absolutely the same. I haven't shifted from any of it. By the way, I have to tell you that I regard the term contrarian as an insult.
You do?
It absolutely assumes that I take positions for effect. All of my positions are taken on principle and after considerable thought.
Well, I certainly
not
didn't...
taken for effect. The problem is that in a largely irrational, uneducated society, rational and educated positions annoy people.
I certainly didn't mean that I was annoyed by your
I know you don't
position.
mean it to be, but but as I think Cardinal Newman said, no gentleman ever unintentionally insults anybody. So you
are we going to recover from this?
Either way, I'm just telling you, don't bleeping well call me a contrarian and expect me to like it.
I hear you.
Thank you.
So in terms of the Conservative Party, I mean, you say you're not telling people to vote for it, but in effect you are.
No, I couldn't conceivably tell anyone to vote for it. The crucial...
But how do you vote against Labour?
The step people have to, well, generally, in many cases, that would involve voting Conservative, not invariably. In my own seat, it's pointless, for instance. I shan't vote because the Labour Party has a majority of nearly 20,000 and it's unassailable. And why should I vote Conservative in the face of that? Pointless. So I won't. And everyone says, oh, you won't vote. Well, I'm only saying voting. I'm trying to extract voting from the strange sanctified urn in which people keep it. Voting is not a sacrament. It's not even a civic duty, and it's certainly not an emotional spasm. It's a practical act with a measurable effect. And in modern Britain, the intelligent and reasoned person knows, because he ceased long ago to believe in Father Christmas and the Tooth Fairy, that voting for things is a waste of time. You won't get what you vote for. But there are definitely occasions when you can effectively vote against things. And this is an occasion where you can effectively vote against the Labour Party and against Keir Starmer and prevent them from coming to office. It's still possible. The opinion polls don't dictate the result of the election. You don't have to be told what to do by propaganda. You can actually use your own mind and your own will to vote. You can say, oh, well, the opinion polls say that Labour have won, therefore I won't vote against them. And it's such a moronic position, isn't it?
Peter, the only point I'm making...
But I have to make people think, and this is the huge, one of the most difficult things in modern Britain, because people have been educated not to think. But so I start by saying, if you want to vote, learn to vote against. Work out what it is you don't want, most of all, and vote against it. And I said, the thing you really don't want, most of all, is the second half of the Blair revolution, which is what you're going to get if you get a Labour government.
Is this you coming out as a Liberal Democrat then, Peter?
You still don't get it, do you?
No.
I'm not for anybody.
Yeah.
I'm against Labour. I'm saying there are a few years left to us in this country where life might remain relatively civilized, and where the downward careering of the country down the slope of Avernus is not complete. And those years would be taken from us if we had a Labour government now.
So I kind of...
I have a personal stake in this.
Yeah.
I'm still alive, to my own amazement. Here I am. I don't want to spend the declining years of my old age under a government headed by someone like Keir Rodney Starmer. We should learn to...
So what is it that you object to about this Labour government? Why is it that you're so fearful of it? What is the havoc that they're going to reap?
It's partly a huge sense of regret that I was so powerless in 1997. I had a column in the Daily Express, it's true, but I had anti-social media had barely developed, and I had no other platform, almost very little access to broadcasting, and I simply didn't have the reach which I think I now possess. And I've always regretted that, because I knew, not in detail because I didn't fully understand it, but from friends of mine who were in the New Labour project, and from my own deductions, that a Blair government would be deeply and irreversibly damaging to the country in many ways. And I couldn't do anything to stop it. And again, we had the same miasma of moronic self-indulgence. Oh, well, the Tories deserve a period in opposition. The Tories deserve to be punished. John Major's awful. That Tony Blair, he looks all right. We don't know what he's going to do, but he says he's in favour of education and things like that. He says he's in favour of being tough on crime. So let's give him a go. And they gave him a go. And he smashed up the United Kingdom. He wrecked the Constitution. He raped the economy. He destroyed huge numbers of personal pensions, for instance. And he unleashed a wave of social, moral, and cultural revolution, which still sweeps through the country with very damaging effects. And all of that was avoidable if people only said, well, yes, okay, John Major isn't that good, is he? But good heavens, it has to be better having him there than having this, a government basically run by Alistair Campbell, which is what we got. So now we have this exactly the same dilemma again. The Labour Party in the intervening period has been a fairly poor, lifeless thing without any serious leadership or purpose. But under Keir Starmer, it now has a serious leadership or purpose, and that purpose is the completion of the Blair Revolution, and also constitutional change to make that completion irreversible. So I think people should realise that, oh, well, in 5 years' time, all right, it doesn't matter if we get a Labour government. As long as the Tories are smashed, that'll be fine. In 2029, we'll be able to get Labour out and go back to normal. You won't. Once these guys move in, they're not going.
So what do you mean by this Blair revolution? Let's actually dig down. Let's look at the components. What does that actually mean? What is it that they want to achieve? How are they going to achieve it?
Well, you see, the huge pillars of it, which people were largely unaware of in 1997, and which in many cases only came into real force in the second Blair term, were the Equality Acts, which has fundamentally altered the whole moral and social nature of the country and changed the way in which people think and speak. The enormous redistribution of the.
Peter, just flesh that point out a little bit.
Okay.
I agree with you, but it would be interesting for viewers and listeners to get a little bit more detail on why it changed the way people think and speak.
Here's one very simple way that this country had been, you might say, officially Christian since before the Norman Conquest. The Equality Act, by making Christianity one among many religions, removed the primacy of Christianity from public life and from law in a way which continues to have profound effects on the way in which people live, the contracts which they make between themselves for personal life. And the sexual revolution which accompanied the Blair government has been enormous. Whether you like it or not, no one could deny that has changed. So has the general predisposition towards equality of outcome in the whole social and welfare system, which again formed part of Gordon Brown's enormous splurge in the second term, which was a huge tranche of redistribution. And those things are just the obvious in some ways superficial aspects of what then turns into a complete social, economic, and political revolution. You must also bear in mind that people have forgotten this now, because it's now so far in the past and appears irreversible. When Labour came into office in 1997, this was the United Kingdom. There were no parliaments in Edinburgh or Cardiff, and that's now happened. And what's also happened is that there's been a breakup of the English part of the United Kingdom with the formation of these mayors, which are almost mini republics. And the London is actually now the only republic in the United Kingdom. It has an elected head of state, which is an interesting piece of test bed politics. But it's also pretty much, it was designed to be a left-wing policy, and it will always be one. And then you look at the constitutional changes which Gordon Brown put forward in 2022 in the Leeds announcement, with Keir Starmer at his side, with a new chamber of the regions and the nations, which will make this permanent. And the other thing, of course, which lies alongside and beneath this, and this is partly because New Labour was a project conceived mainly by lawyers, was the creation of the Supreme Court. It was constitutional nonsense in a country with parliamentary supremacy, but they created it, and it continues to accrue power to itself. And one of the main effects of the constitutional changes, which were put forward in 2022, would be more powers for the Supreme Court, more powers taken away from Parliament, and particularly from the House of Commons, so that it simply ceases to be sovereign. David Stark is very good on this if you want to ask him about it, but it is an extraordinary, astonishing document, which very few people have read, and it lies there waiting to be implemented. I think probably, given the way it's referred to in the Labour manifesto, which is, as I've said, a bikini, and that it covers what it reveals is much less interesting than what it conceals. But the reference to constitution in the Labour manifesto, which I have actually read, suggests that unless they get very lucky with a huge majority, they'll probably wait until the second term to implement the Chamber of the Regions and all the other changes which are in it. But it's well worth reading in the interim, because it's extremely cleverly drawn. These people are not fools. They understand very well how the British Constitution works, and they understand that if they arrange it in the way that they wish to do so, then any future government will be unable to undo what they've done. This has been a preoccupation in Labour since the 1930s. I think John Strachey was the first person to raise it. Nye Bevan again raised it in 1945. Labour have always felt that it was unfair that a Conservative government could come into office and undo what they'd done. They wanted to have some kind of ratchet by which it was agreed that their key reforms would be irreversible. And now, with this constitutional plan, they've got it.
And so, what do you think if Starmer wins? What do you think are the first things that he is going to try and do when he gets in? What do you think is going to be the main target?
So here's the thing: we cannot know. In 1997, nobody knew, for instance, that Gordon Brown would abolish the government control over the Bank of England and make it independent. It was an amazing, and in my view, extremely bad development. Nobody knew that he was going to make this tremendous raid upon private pension funds. And nobody knew that there was going to be the constitutional putsch which placed Alistair Campbell and Jonathan Powell in charge of civil servants, although they were not in any way responsible to any Chamber of Parliament. Astonishing development, which was considered outrageous at the time. None of these things were in the manifesto. None of them had even been rumoured before, though in fact Alex Brummer had discovered about the pension plan when he was working for The Guardian in the period before the election, and the Guardian disgracefully cooperated with Gordon Brown in suppressing the news. So we don't know what Starmer is suppressing about his major plans, but all the major things which Labour did in the aftermath of its victory in 1997 were things it hadn't told anybody about.
And what makes you...
So I don't know what they might do, but I don't think any of them will be nice.
Interesting. And what makes you suspect of Keir Starmer personally?
Starmer himself is a man of very interesting background. I think his struggles over, what I find actually the rather dull subject of the transgender issue, are interesting. The reason why he struggles over it is because he is, by inclination and politics for a long time, a person of the very, very far left. He was mixed up with a tendency called Pabloism in his 20s, which is an outward branch of Trotskyism, named after a man whose nom de guerre was Pablo, who's really a Greek revolutionary called Michalis Raptis, who decided that the old form of revolutionary socialism was clapped out, in which he was absolutely right. The seizure of the post office and the barracks by the working class, that wasn't going to happen. but the revolutionaries should concentrate on two things, the red and the green. The red being the cultural, moral, and revolution, sort of Gramscian takeover of society in every corner. And the green bit, of course, the fanatical and zealous pursuit of net zero and similar targets. And the red bit is, of course, sexual politics, amongst other things. And Starmer, I think, recognizes and has had difficulty over this because he really believes this stuff.
Do you? Or do you think?
I think people, when Starmer in that first debate said, he was asked whether if a relative was suffering on the NHS waiting list, would he go private? He said no. Mm-hmm. People thought he was making it up or pretending. I absolutely believe him. He's an extremely dogmatic person. The other very interesting thing was when he was finally asked a political question interview a week or so ago. Nick Ferrari asked him, when he kept on referring to working people and they wouldn't face any more taxes, who did he mean by working people? And he said, in effect, I won't try and quote exactly, but what the effect of what he said was that the people he does not regard as working people are people with savings. Now, there are many, many people in this country who are not particularly well off who do have savings and who have managed to accumulate assets. They will all, I think, face very strong egalitarian taxation in one form or another under this government. There are other things about Starmer's policy which are fascinating. The Daily Mail the other day revealed that he'd been on a trip, a work camp trip to Czechoslovakia, deep in the deep frozen years of communism in 1986. This was in the period when people like Václav Havel were being thrown into jail, when Charter 77 supporters were trying very hard to draw attention to the complete lack of freedom of speech, when anybody who opposed the communist regime in Czechoslovakia was either put into prison or driven from his profession and made to work in menial tasks. It was a miserable Cold War time, and yet he went on this work camp. He was also, when he was a lawyer, a young lawyer in 1980s, secretary of a body called the Haldane Society of Socialist Lawyers. Now, there are lots of things I could say about that, but I won't say any more than this. The Haldane Society was the result of a split among left-wing lawyers in London in the 1940s, a split largely between sympathizers of the Soviet Union and non-sympathizers of the Soviet Union, in which the Haldane Society was the society of choice for those who were more inclined towards sympathy for the Soviet Union, and the Society of Labour Lawyers was the Society of Labour Lawyers, of normal Labour Party members who were also lawyers. No one who was a left-wing lawyer in London in the 1980s could not have known about this distinction. I have particular reasons for knowing about it, but no one, Keir Starmer could not have known, could not have been unaware that there was this distinction, yet he was secretary of the Haldane Society rather than a member of the Society for Labour Lawyers. You have to ask why. I think that he's a man of the pretty strong, hard left, probably wealthy left of Jeremy Corbyn, in a modern and, as I said, partly Gramscian way, which is incomprehensible to most people who write about politics in this country, because most people who write about politics in this country are politically illiterate, particularly about the left, and don't understand its language. Or its
perhaps I'm certain that we are two of them. So explain it to us, because the public perception is that Keir Starmer is this centrist figure who's taken on the extremes of his own party, who's got rid of Jeremy Corbyn,
Yep.
He's got rid of Diane Abbott, who's got rid of all this far left progressive fringe. And he's the center-left, moderate, centrist dad. Why is that wrong? Are you ready to start building wealth by putting your precious metals to work? Silver isn't just a precious metal. It's a tangible asset and a great way to diversify any investment portfolio. With Monetary Metals, you don't just own physical silver. You own silver that works for you, generating more silver and growing your total ounces over time.
Introducing the first true silver bond since 1834. Right now, you can earn 12% annual interest on silver paid in silver through their latest offering. This bond has a 3-year term and is financing a publicly traded mining company located in the Western United States. Remember, you must be an accredited investor to participate.
Personally, I've been very impressed with Monetary Metals. They're revolutionizing how you invest in gold and silver. For over 8 years, they've been paying interest in silver and gold, helping you grow your wealth with real, tangible assets. Finally, there's a true alternative to saving in dollars, earning a yield on gold and silver with Monetary Metals.
Head to the link in the description or go to monetary-metals.com/trigonometry for more information on how to participate.
That's monetary-metals.com/trigonometry. And now, Back to the interview.
There is an old, almost sentimentally lovable old left, steam-powered old Trotskyist like Jeremy Corbyn, and open, sort of rather noisy, very sincere leftists like Diane Abbott, people of that kind, who are no threat to anybody because you can see them coming about 30 miles off. And there is the subtle, smooth left, which became Blairism, the left of Eurocommunism, the crucial year in all this being 1968, when two things happened. One, the Soviet Union and its allies invaded Czechoslovakia and horrified almost everybody on the serious left who had up till then had any sympathy with the Soviet Union, and broke probably forever that connection. So there was particularly in the Italian Communist Party a movement towards some form of serious leftism, which was no longer Soviet, no longer believed in the complete takeover of industry and the economy by the state, which looked back to Antonio Gramsci, who was an Italian communist who'd seen in the 20s that Soviet socialism wouldn't work. And at the same time, you had this 1968 events in Paris, which were largely about sex. They began with a quarrel about male access to female dormitories at the Nanterre branch of the University of Paris. And that's what they were about: sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And if you go and look at all there's the museums of all those posters that were stuck up at the time, it's quite clear that's what it's about. Those two channels of thought came together into a current called Eurocommunism, which took over the theoretical journal of the British Communist Party, Marxism Today, which became actually the theoretical journal of New Labour. And if you look at New Labour's front ranks, and this is only because you're limited in knowing anything about this because all you know is what's come out. Much more may well exist which doesn't come out. An extraordinary number of Blair's cabinet colleagues had been Marxists of one kind or another during the 1960s and 1970s. Blair himself, and this was concealed during his entire time as leader of the Labour Party, Blair himself was a Trotskyist at Oxford University. And people don't necessarily stop being revolutionists because they stopped running around going on demonstrations or believing the working class was about to take over. What happened to the revolutionists of the 60s was they refined and sophisticated their politics and sought a moral, cultural, and social revolution by other means, and began a long march through the institutions which bore fruit in the 1990s and is still with us.
Peter, do you not think...
I understand this because I was so very nearly in it.
Oh, no, of course.
I was there. I was myself a revolutionary Marxist in the late 60s and 1970s, and I broke quite bitterly with my former comrades, and I make it public. Anyone who asks me, I'll tell them all about it. You know, when I joined, where I joined, what I did, and all the rest of it. They don't. Not one of these people who rose to cabinet rank in the Blair government has ever sat down and discussed in detail what it was that they did.
And why have the right-wing newspapers and media not exposed this?
Because they don't understand it. And I do. Actually, if you don't have any understanding of Marxism-Leninism, you're completely at a loss for understanding modern European politics.
So,
a lot of, for instance, someone like Daniel Cohn-Bendit, who ended up as Euro MP, the currents which began in 1968 Paris, and the May events with people throwing cobblestones at the gendarmerie, ended up, in many cases, deep in the institutions of the European Union. One of the main founders of the European project was an Italian communist guy, Altiero Spinelli. You don't know this. But if you are an ex-Trotskyist, you do know, because you can read the signs and you understand the code. It's all there. This is a left-wing project which we face.
You look somewhat inexplicably excited about this.
It's funny. It's become, I used to make me absolutely furious standing there and saying, look, and people saying, what are you talking about? And now I've given up that, and I know no one's ever going to pay any attention to anything I say. So I have to learn to enjoy the role of Cassandra. The original Cassandra had a terrible time, poor thing, because she continued to believe that one day somebody might listen to her. Look, that horse, it's full of soldiers. No, but I've learned that it only makes me unhappy worrying about that. So now it makes me laugh, watching people who think they know about politics, who don't.
Peter, is there a part of you that thinks that this particular Labour project is doomed to failure because there's too many different types of leftist under one particular umbrella.
He sounds like he's saying it's doomed to succeed.
But
Well, no utopian project ever succeeds, but that's axiomatic. But in the course of failing, it doesn't mean it isn't going to roll over civil society and any opposition to it like a steamroller.
so what you're effectively saying is that this is going to destroy our
Yeah, it's a
society.
bit Channel 4, isn't it, what you're really saying?
No, I would never do that. But
Kathy Newman lives.
I think both Kathy Newman and I are offended by that comparison. But what you're talking about is the destruction of British society,
Yeah.
really.
Yeah, civil society, yes. Of course. Well, the Blairites did a lot of that anyway. Look how almost none of the professions, almost none of the institutions remains independent. And the real triumph, the stealth triumph of their transformation of the courts and the legal system is astounding. Hardly anybody's even heard of the Judicial Appointments Commission, which revolutionized the appointments to the judges' bench. Very few people understand the nature and extent of the powers of the Supreme Court. These are gigantic changes, but because they bore people, as most serious left-wing change does, because they bore people, they can't bother to concentrate on them or think about them. And there simply hasn't been in British conservatism any intellect capable of understanding what they're up against for a very long time.
So what do you think of now what we're seeing, which is a populist revolution sweeping through Europe?
Oh, I don't think there is such a thing. I think there's an increase in the vote in certain disreputable parties, but most of the countries involved have electoral systems which contain that. And we make a lot of fuss when the ex-fascist party in Transylvania moves up from 11% to 16% in the proportional representation in the European election. I don't myself think the moment for panic has yet arrived. Emmanuel Macron has a bit of a problem in France, but that's because he destroyed the French Tory party to get into office in the first place, and so he now hasn't got any defence against a complete left-right split. And also, Marine Le Pen has been quite clever, but that's the only really serious problem that any of the major European countries have.
Geert Wilders in Holland?
Well, what's his percentage?
Look, his party was the biggest party.
Yeah, but what was his percentage?
I don't remember.
Well, look it up. It's not that big. I mean, this is being the biggest party in the Netherlands doesn't mean you're very big.
But it invariably means that means
like being the biggest strongman in Lilliput. It really isn't very big. He hasn't got a parliamentary majority. He has to. If he forms a government, he has to form it with people who disagree with him and who will get in his way. And in a coalition which is formed after the election.
So, Peter, bringing this back to home, then the one party you mentioned that a lot of people who are frustrated with the state of the Conservative Party, as you are, the one party that they are keen to vote for is Reform. What are your thoughts on Nigel Farage and Reform?
Well,
I get it. I see. It's that bad.
sorry, I'm suffering from election fever at the moment.
I thought that was an allergic reaction, Peter.
It may have been, but we're in the realm of the subconscious here, as we always are when dealing with Nigel Farage. I don't regard Nigel Farage as conservative. I regard him as a sort of watered down. Britain's Tizer to America's Coca-Cola, Britain's Farage to America's Trump. It's a sort of, he is a rightish populist, whatever that means, but he isn't a conservative. I mean, for instance, he has said, he's now sort of scrabbling backwards on it because I keep drawing attention to it. He has spoken out in favour of the decriminalisation of marijuana, for instance, which either no intelligent person and no conservative could conceivably support. So he gave himself away twice on that. I don't think he's got a developed set of positions on social and cultural matters at all, or understands basically what he's up against in New Labour. And in many ways, I think my description of whatever his party is called this week as a Thatcher tribute band isn't far out. That's who it really appeals to, is Thatcher nostalgists for an era which has definitively gone. So I don't think all that much of him, but the other point about it is In fact, there is a less famous than it should be encounter between him and me on GB News, which I recommend you all to watch, which seems to me to end rather abruptly, because he was in control of it. Then anybody can watch it. It's still there on the internet. Pints with Nigel Farage or something.
Yeah.
Watch it. You'll get an idea of what I think of Nigel Farage from there, better than I can give you in our short encounter now. But in terms of voting, the British voting system is very simple. There are two parties which can win general election in 2024, and neither of them is Reform. And if you do vote for Reform, if you were going to vote for, what should I say, another party which was more likely to defeat Labour, then you are effectively voting Labour. There isn't any getting out of this. I mean, the Reform spokesman at the debate I attended last night at Unheard admitted it. They can't win this time. It's not possible. And they all go on about how there's going to be some catastrophe now. They sound actually remarkably like Trotskyists. They're going to have a catastrophe out of which will come the revolution in 2029, after 5 years of Keir Starmer. Then it'll be all right.
Well, that is the
argument.
argument.
Our northern shores, Nigel Farage will appear and sweep the country. Well, I don't think this is very likely, practically or politically, not least because it seems to me that Labour and Keir Starmer have no intention of relinquishing what they gain. The incredible cynicism, and it is in the manifesto, of giving votes to 16-year-olds. And no, it's indefensible. He knows it's indefensible. It's only a couple of years since Labour MPs voted to ban people from getting married at the age of 16. And you can't, and also they banned them from buying cigarettes at the age of 16. You can't buy fireworks. You can't go you can't be put in a combat unit in the army at 16, and yet suddenly voting's okay. It is boundlessly cynical. And it comes from a man who has, in recent years, said that he would like to give EU citizens living in Britain the vote. He now says he doesn't want to do that, but how valuable is that as a pledge? He makes a weathercock look like a signpost. He swivels around so much on things that don't matter to him. This is, I think, probably because his deep, profound, dogmatic left-wing principles never alter. He feels quite happy about swiveling around wildly on superficial issues. But I think that the idea that this Labour Party, if it gains power, will relinquish it again is fanciful. They won't. They're not proposing to give up. You get at least 20 years of them. By that time, they will pretty much have finished their project.
So you think that we're going to get 20 years?
I should think so.
Because we've spoken to a lot of people.
They've always wanted 20 years.
Oh, I mean, every political party wants 20 years.
But there's a particular thing, if you're transferring wealth from one group of people to another, any form of taxation has to be slow acting on this. You can't do it quickly. It has to be done slowly. This is the point that Nye Bevan made in his very dangerous speech in 1945, that to do what they needed a really long period in government, which they felt cheated of course, in 51 when they were kicked out after only 6 years. If the 45 government had lasted as it was intended to do, probably till 1960, the country would have been through a much more profound social and economic revolution than it actually suffered.
But
because they finished in 51, and what they left behind was in many cases quite popular, but they hadn't gone on to the bad bits. You know?
But I guess when it comes to that point about the 20 years, every person on the left, let's be fair, the lefters are always in this purity spiral where they're always going, you're not really on the left because of X, you're not really on the left because of Y. I haven't spoken to somebody on the left or in Labour who is actually enthused by Keir Starmer at all, which makes me think, is he actually going to be able to last even a term?
Don't you remember the same about Blair?
No, when I remember when Blair
they
came
were
to power.
always saying, we can't stand him, he's really a Tory and all this stuff. Half the Labour Party membership say that the whole time. But then they can't understand it either. And you had two groups of people who didn't understand Blair. One were the Kevins in the working men's clubs, who thought Blair was a Tory, and the other were the Nigels in the golf clubs, who also thought Blair was a Tory. They were both equally wrong. But to reveal to Labour supporters how radical Labour was would have been to reveal to the golf club goers how radical they were. And they didn't want to do that, so they were left in ignorance. It doesn't do any harm. They still vote Labour when it comes to it. Labour vote is still pretty loyal.
Peter, well, I think the point Fran's making, I do think it's a fair one, is the level of enthusiasm that we saw in 1997 is simply not there for the...
Well, thank heaven for that, at least.
Right.
But I mean, they can manage without enthusiasm, provided their organisation. Who needs enthusiasm when you have had this amazing business of the opinion polls trumpeting from the moment the election began, the Tories have already lost, the Tories have already lost, the Tories have already lost, night and day into the earphones, the Tories have already lost, the Tories have lost, the Tories have lost, every day, every afternoon, every morning, every evening, every night, the Tories have lost, the Tories have lost. People believe it. That's
but
what
it's
you
not.
need.
Come
This
on.
is the best form of
Peter, it's not just that.
propaganda. If you've got an enemy army bottled up, you fly over with your planes dropping the propaganda leaflets pointing out that you've lost, surrender. It's what you do. You tell people they've already lost.
No, that's
in
fair
the end,
enough.
they believe it. It's been incredible. Who needs a manifesto? Who needs who needs even to win a debate? Who needs to have a personality, which Keir Starmer appears to lack? Who needs to have any presence, which Keir Starmer has to lack? Who needs to have any posters? Have you seen an election van? Who needs to have any activity? If you've got that going for you, then what does it matter? And so enthusiasm is not necessary.
No, we were talking about enthusiasm as in there is a lack of enthusiasm at the moment, which will translate into we're in a difficult situation economically as a country. I don't think many of the things that people are concerned about at the moment are going to get any better over the next 5 years. They're probably going to get worse. And so the argument is after 5 years, people are going to be the way that they're currently annoyed with the Conservative Party, they're going to be just as annoyed, if not more, with the Labour Party, which is perhaps the reform opportunity.
But in 5 years, quite a lot of the existing Conservative vote will have gone to their reward, and the 16-year-olds will be able to vote. And the number of people, the number of loyal Conservatives in this country goes down all the time because they're not making them anymore. Very few people are growing up Conservative. It just isn't happening. So the simple passage of time reduces the Conservative vote. And if you enfranchise 16-year-olds and if you enfranchise EU citizens living in this country, of whom there are quite a few, then what does it matter whether you have enthusiasm or not? Enthusiasm is not necessary where you have organisation and effective propaganda.
But Peter, as well, it's not just, it's also the incompetence of the Conservative Party and the fact that they have failed to deliver on key election pledges, including immigration.
Well, of course it is. But I mean, this is a given, like the fact the sun rises in the east and the morning comes before the afternoon. We know this. It's not worth discussing. That's so, but it doesn't affect here we have probably the biggest political, economic and social change which this country has undergone in its modern history, and an election campaign of total vacuity in which no major issue is ever discussed. How does that come about? That is the important thing. And people trotting, bleating towards the pens where they're assured that they can strike a blow at the Conservative Party and that's what they're going to vote for. That's what we're going to vote for. We're going to punish the Tories. In fact, we're going to punish ourselves. Everybody who votes to put a Labour government in will be punishing himself or herself for decades to come. But for one brief shining moment, lasting perhaps 45 seconds, think, gosh, I've punished the Tories. Great. I've really given a hard time to Liz Truss. I've voted Labour. Well, I haven't voted. I've voted Reform, but I've actually voted Labour. That'll show Liz Truss, won't you know? Nothing will show Liz Truss actually. It's just ludicrous. It is to say it's mistaking a political act for an emotional spasm, or the other way around.
Peter, it's always great to get you on because you really cheer us up.
Well, that's my job. There's nothing. Look at me. It's being so pessimistic, accepting that we're all doomed, that keeps me so cheerful. And I remind you of my watchword: in between the crisis and the catastrophe, we may as well have a glass of champagne.
And
it's my view. I can't live any other way. If I actually believed that I could influence events and that I wasn't doing enough to do it, I would go mad with grief. So I can't. So I just cease to do that. There's no point in making yourself deliberately unhappy.
so what should
I don't think there is. I mean, there are people, and obviously, who have all kinds of weird proclivities. And this is my other point. If you don't like the Conservative government, and you're going to substitute a Labour government for it, you're like someone who's living with a masochist, who doesn't like all those whips and chains and handcuffs and stuff, and chucks out the masochist and goes and moves in with the sadist. It's a ludicrous reaction to the problem.
So, what should the ordinary
Reaching you.
What should the ordinary person do, Peter?
He's told you
Vote against Labour. Give yourself another 5 years before the heavens fall. Vote against Labour. It won't be as bad if you do that and succeed in keeping them out as it will be if they get in.
And then
maybe some miracle. Maybe we'll discover another vast bubble of gas and oil. Maybe some other fantastic thing will happen to the country between now and the next election, during which we can rescue ourselves economically and on the basis of that politically and socially as well. It's highly unlikely, but who knows? Stranger things have happened. Maybe, but whatever, you'll at least give yourself a 5-year reprieve from the worst imaginable government in modern times. Why would you possibly not take that chance? Offered a reprieve. Why not take it?
every man knows how scary it can get when going for a close shave below the waist. That's why I trust Manscaped for all my sensitive areas. Plus, we've been working with Manscaped for 3 years now, and they pay us for saying this. Introducing the Lawnmower family, including the Lawnmower 3.0 Plus, the 4.0 Pro, and the 5.0 Ultra. Yep, 3 ball trimmers. Isn't it awesome? They told me to say that.
Each trimmer is equipped with skin-safe technology and unique features for different grooming needs. Oh, and these babies are waterproof too. Need I say more? They made us say that as well.
These trimmers come with a travel case and even a travel lock feature to avoid any accidental powering and or weird looks in the airport.
Get 20% off plus free shipping with the code TRIGGER20 at manscaped.com. That's 20% off and free shipping with the code TRIGGER20 at manscaped.com.
Manscaped, trim your chesticles with the besticles. They keep making me say these lines.
I mean, look, your argument sounds more and more rational as I become determined to leave this country imminently, based on your excellent advice.
Well, as you can. The simple, if you are able to make a living somewhere else, as things are, I've never seen a country more wrecked than this one, and more determined to pursue a path of wreckage. I mean, look, add to what we have now, our economic problems that we have now, add a fanatical pursuit of net zero over the next 10 years. The idea that Labour, while it pursues net zero, can somehow or other mastermind an economic recovery is comically impossible. And I would like to remind you that Rachel Reeves, the supposedly moderate and responsible chancellor, has a favourite guru in the world of economists. Do you know who she is? It's the late Joan Robinson. Do you know anything about her?
No.
Well, she was a very clever woman, but she did have a bit of a tendency to admire, first of all, Mao Zedong, and then after that, North Korea.
Excellent.
And she is the proclaimed favourite economist guru.
Well, look, they've tackled the carbon problem in North Korea very well. Yeah.
And so you're not here dealing with unideological people.
And so what did this economist want? I mean, you've alluded to it.
Well, Joan Robinson?
Yes.
Well, she had a particular, I can't even remember the name of her post-Keynes theory, but you can find, and I have published, works in which she loads praise upon the Mao Zedong regime during some of its stupidest action, and that's quite stupid. And also a particular article in which she becomes extremely lyrical about the Democratic People's Republic of Korea.
Now,
and this is the named guru of our prospective Chancellor of the Exchequer. I wish you joy of it. Again, I shall be laughing.
Now, if we look at the Conservative Party, what do they need to do in order to regain the trust of the British people?
Well, if they were to remain in government and keep out Labour, the best thing they could do, because they won't do it because they're choosing, would be to continue to govern the country, not as New Labour as they have been, but with a certain amount of conservatism, while the rest of us burrowed away to replace them with a proper Conservative Party, by which I do not mean Reform UK. I mean a party which understands the nature and principles of conservatism. It would give us a 5-year interval in which we could do that. All I would ask for them to do is not make things any worse.
So what are your predictions for the election, Peter?
I don't know. I don't think anybody knows. I mistrust polls. I've lived through many occasions when polls have been wrong.
This level, though? To this level? I mean, for the Labour Party not to be elected
remember,
now.
Polls are not what they were when Mr. Dr. Gallup invented opinion polls before the Second World War. People lived in houses, and you would go and knock on their doors, and they'd answer the doors, and and there was no working from home, so there were times you catch them in, and people answered their telephones. And now you have a completely different society. I would be fascinated to know how, in a country where people rarely answer the door unless they think it's Amazon, and how in a society where nobody under the age of 40 seems to answer the telephone ever anymore, opinion polls are conducted. And the other thing that I do know, particularly from the 2010 election, which I looked at very closely because I simply did not believe the constant reports that David Cameron was on course for a smashing victory. What happened was that huge numbers of people were either not saying how they were going to vote or saying they didn't know. And they were excluded from the tallies, which the newspapers then published as if they were tallies of 100%. So the newspaper would say that the Tories had gained 5 or 7% in the poll. In fact, they gained 5 or 7% of about 40% of the vote, so much, much less than that. So quite small movements were portrayed as big. It can be very misleading. My view is that the opinion poll organizations, the work they do, to the extent that they can, in the circumstances they do it, is good. It has to be, because their basic job is market research. If they fail in elections, then their market research customers won't come to them anymore. But those are the raw figures. The way in which those raw figures are then projected by the media is a totally different thing, and you have to be aware of that. So I don't know. I remember very well when I was a Trotskyist in 1970, I was also 18 and just benefited from Harold Wilson's cynical granting of the vote to 18-year-olds. Standing outside Oxford Town Hall at midnight, because polls closed earlier in those days, waiting for the result, which I assume would be a Labour victory, and out onto the balcony of Oxford Town Hall on that warm June night came the newly elected Tory MP, the Right Honourable Monty Woodhouse, formerly of MI6. And it was a great surprise to us all, and that was the first inclination I and anybody else had that night of a complete failure of the opinion polls together. They predicted a 75 majority for Harold Wilson, and he was thrown out of office. And famously, the swingometer in the BBC studios, which was then painted on a piece of plywood, wasn't big enough to express the swing, so they had to get a painter in to paint a longer curve on the swingometer, because the polls were so wrong. I also remember 1992 when everybody thought Neil Kinnock would win. And recently, elections abroad in India and in Australia and in Norway, the polls have been completely wrong. It's the polling organizations constantly strive to keep up with changing society. So nothing needs to surprise you. What I think people should be very careful of is don't let the polls rob you of your mind and will. Do you, in any important action in your life, look over your shoulder before you decide what to do? Or do you, as a self-respecting person, make your own mind up? Letting your vote be influenced by the opinion polls is being the pathetic, directionless person, the nowhere man who can't make up his own mind. Why be that person? The election hasn't taken place. Why people are still going around all the time, acting and speaking and thinking as if it has? Big mistake. Even from the simple point of view of self-respect, it's a big mistake.
And Peter, I really want to focus on conservatism. What do you mean by conservatism? Because we talk to a lot of people, everybody seems to have a different view of it.
Oh, love of God, love of country, love of beauty, love of the family and of your fellow man, and expressed in lasting, fair institutions, an absolute attachment to freedom and the rule of law, an unwillingness to change where it's not necessary, and a willingness to change where it is, an ability to tell change from progress and progress from change. One could go on, but you obviously don't want the long definition. I'd have to give you a book.
And why is this Conservative government, in your opinion, not conservative?
Well, it never has been. The Conservative Party has always been an organisation for obtaining office for the sons of gentlemen. The name has always been misleading, and its history is not particularly conservative, and indeed it absorbed what was left of the Liberal Party. Winston Churchill, if you remember, spent a lot of his political life as a Liberal at one point. It's never been a Conservative Party, so it would be unfair to accuse it of being a Conservative Party. And indeed, especially since David Cameron explicitly took it over and turned it into a Blairite formation, that he didn't understand Blairism, he knew what he had to do. Since then, anybody who's voted Conservative has got what they deserved. People who say, well, I voted Conservative in whenever the last election was, I've lost count of them, I didn't get a Conservative government. I say to them, well, what did you expect? There isn't a Conservative to be seen anywhere near the front bench of the party, or any Conservative sentiment to be found in Tory manifestos. Why would you expect that? And especially after you voted to ratify David Cameron's Blairite takeover of the Conservative Party in 2010, you've got what you asked for. So now to turn around in 2024 and say, oh gosh, the Tories aren't very conservative. What's wrong with you? These presumably people who wander around in the rain for 3/4 of an hour and after they've become soaking wet, start complaining about the weather forecast. It's just, people don't think about politics.
So
I can't help them either. I try, and they get angry and call me a contrarian.
Well, I certainly didn't get angry. I just called you a contrarian to wind you up, which has worked out very well because we've had a great conversation. But the thing that I guess this boils down to is the Peter Hitchens recommendation is you should vote against Labour, which most of the time will mean voting for the Conservative Party, while knowing you're voting for simply a slightly less Blairite version of the same thing.
I don't think so. I think this is a Starmer government would be a major step. Since really the washed out old Gordon Brown government that tried to stay in office in 2010, to which I would have had no objection. In many ways, Gordon Brown was to the right of David Cameron, particularly on European matters, I think, and the European single currency. He was exhausted and played out and had run out of ideas, and to have left him in office in 2010 wouldn't have been a big problem. The other leaders that Labour have groped for in the intervening period have not really been convincing or likely winners. Starmer is the first real attempt to bring together the full force of Blairism again in politics, and you'll note that it's attracted the support and help of prominent veterans of the Blair Revolution of '97. It's a much more powerful thing than the Tories faced for a very long time, or indeed than the country has faced. And it's not just a minor difference. The Tories have been caretaking Blairism since 2010, as I say, without understanding it, and therefore without having the initiative to pursue it, and sometimes even very slightly restraining and diminishing it. They're nothing like as much as they should have done. But what a Starmer government do would be to bring the full force of will and enthusiasm and dogma and power. And if what we're told is true, a very big and unassailable majority back into the Blairite locomotive. And it would be capable of pulling immense loads and attaining immense speeds. And that which will make, if people don't like Conservative government, then they really won't like Starmer government.
And what do you think Starmer's stance is going to be on immigration? Because he's alluded to the fact that he wants to tackle illegal immigration, or do you think it's going to be very much an open border policy?
I think it's a subject which is in some ways largely over. I mean, mass immigration has happened in this country, and irreversibly, and a lot of the problems which we face now are going to have to be with how as civilized people we cope with it. I don't think he has any particular policy, and I think any attempts to get him to set one out have failed because he doesn't. I don't think he has in his deep heart's core any particular objection to large-scale immigration. He probably realizes as a political issue, it is possibly one of the things most dangerous to his party in the long term. But I don't think he really has one. When he talks about, and Starmer, it's been said by clever people, not by me, but it's true, that Starmer approaches every problem as a lawyer. He tries to prosecute it out of existence. And when he makes these speeches about how he's going to have these special squads and prosecutors he's going to catch the people smugglers, I think he genuinely believes that he can do something by that method. But I don't think he has any profound idea, because I don't think he really knows what to do any more than the Tories have known what to do.
Well, Peter, there you go. It's a pleasure having you back on to, as I say, cheer everybody up right before the election.
Well, I'd like to feel that I bring happiness into every home.
In a manner of speaking.
Oh, indeed, that's just the key to happiness is pessimism. Optimism is absolutely the road to misery.
Peter Hitchens, the last question before we go to locals and ask you questions from our audience. The last question we always ask in the main section is, what's the one thing we're not talking about that we really should be?
Before Peter answers a final question, at the end of the interview, make sure to head over to our locals. The link is in the description where you'll be able to see this.
Do you think there's a case for banning opinion polls during election campaigns? It seems odd that they're only restricted on election day.
How much of the decline of the UK is the obsession with fighting foreign conflicts?
I'm glad that rainbows can now cross the road. Actually, probably the standing of this country in the world, our fantasy that we are still a great power, our fantasy that we're still very rich. And these two fantasies prevent us from actually being, in my view, a far more prosperous and far happier society, because we constantly strain to be what we once definitely were and are no longer. And by straining to do that, by continuing to make these pretenses of being a great power, we fail to discuss how, in fact, we could be a smaller, happier, more prosperous, more contented, and more successful country. I wish we could discuss that, but it seems to be largely undiscussable.
Peter Hitchens, thank you very much. Follow us over to locals where we ask Peter your questions.